Much of the power of Toni Morrison's 1993 Nobel lecture comes from the artful work the literary master does in terms of the setup, as well as in its daring refusal to appear in the slightest way like a typical lecture. Here's how she starts it off. Once upon a time, there was an old woman, blind but wise. On the surface, it's an invocation of a folk tale that is central to many cultures, as well as a nod on an anthropological level to something fundamentally human, our oral storytelling tradition. What could have been the speech of how she, Toni Morrison, became a master of her craft and what her writing career has meant to her, on the surface, appears to have nothing at all to do with the writer herself. That is the genius of this lecture. It simultaneously has nothing whatsoever to do with the person accepting perhaps the most esteemed prize one can be awarded, while also having absolutely everything to do with her and everything she sought to accomplish through the written word. Though I love many of her novels and in fact consider Song of Solomon to be my favorite novel ever written, Morrison's 1993 Nobel lecture might just be my favorite piece of writing ever because of how effective it is at encapsulating her incredible significance, all while just simply telling a story. This is the one piece of writing I encourage pretty much everyone I meet to read because of how powerful it is. For those of you who haven't read it or listened to Toni Morrison deliver it herself, I strongly recommend you do so. To that end, I'll leave a link to the speech in this video's description. For those of you who read this video's title and made it this far, you may be scratching your head, wondering to yourself, wait, is this the wrong video? Isn't this supposed to be about video games? Don't worry, you clicked on the correct link. I wanted to start with a reference to my favorite piece of writing because I think it's incredibly relevant to something I've been thinking a lot about lately. What we talk about when we talk about video games, or more to the point, how we talk to each other. As we explore this topic, I'm asking you to go on a literary journey with me, and maybe even step outside your comfort zone. If you think back a few years to elementary school, you might remember hearing the term point of view when talking about a story you were reading in class. You might even remember terms like third-person limited or first-person omniscient. However much you may recall from the beginnings of your academic career, one thing we all were taught about literature is that all stories are told from a point of view. To take it a step further, whether it's a narrator or a character within the story, a narrative is told from someone's perspective. Most of the time, the perspective doesn't change, though you may have read works by more experimental authors like William Faulkner, Virginia Woolf, or Toni Morrison herself, where the perspective does change. This shift in perspective is often employed to explore the same sequence of events and how those moments impact characters differently, as well as how those characters' unique experiences and contexts inform what truths they glean from the things that happen to them in the story. As the story unfolds, these different perspectives or points of view come together and reach some sort of understanding, which contributes to the overall feeling of resolution we experience during the denouement. To get unfairly reductive to illustrate a point, we see this most commonly employed to create a "we're not so different after all" moment. It's an incredibly effective tool in that regard. Morrison's use of multiple perspectives, however, is much more dynamic, which I think is the most relevant detail to this video. As she begins weaving her deceptively familiar tale, we are lulled into a childlike state of comfort at the mere utterance of "once upon a time." But almost immediately, she disrupts things by calling into question whom we're even talking about. Quote, or was it an old man? A guru, perhaps? After some internal debate, she settles back on the original subject of the wise, blind old woman and trudges ahead. On the surface, everything seems right again, though it's incredibly fascinating that she ever so slightly calls into question her own reliability as the narrator of her own Nobel acceptance speech. I could do a whole other video just on that. Leaving that for another time though, we find our way safely back to the trappings of a story we've heard so many times before. We have our wise, elderly protagonist and a group of young people who are cast as our antagonists for the impudence they demonstrate by seeking out this venerated woman only to mock her for her inability to see. They come to her, allegedly, with a bird and a question that she cannot answer because she is blind. Quote, "Is the bird I am holding living or dead?" Instead of giving in to their mockery, the old woman chastises them. Quote, "I don't know whether the bird you are holding is dead or alive. But what I do know is that it is in your hands. It is in your hands." After that stern pronouncement, Morrison then pontificates on what the alleged bird could signify. There are a few things that come to mind from the first half of her speech. First of all, these young people came to her, an old wise woman, respected and well known as a paragon of wisdom, and wasted their time as well as her time with a joke question. This is the obvious conclusion we're meant to draw as Morrison narrates the story from a perspective that privileges the old woman over the group of young people by virtue of the principal character's positioning as protagonist and antagonist respectively. You see, language and narrative are inherently reductive. We have to pick a side, a perspective, try as we might to relay the events of a story in a spirit of fairness to all involved. We privilege certain groups over others always already when we adopt a point of view. But these rascals could have asked this woman anything. If they truly appreciated the opportunity to speak with someone who presumably has earned her reputation, they could have had a fruitful discussion. They didn't approach her in good faith, and she responded in kind with a reprimand. But that doesn't mean we should just let the old woman off the hook either. Morrison certainly doesn't in the second half of her lecture after the dynamic shift in perspective. But even if we stay in the first half of the speech and think about what's literally happening in the story, we can glean a pretty interesting insight. Assuming that the group of young people actually did bring a literal bird with them, it wouldn't have been hard to ascertain whether or not the bird was living or dead, even without the sense of sight. Whether there were clear signs or not of ill will, the old woman assumed her visitor's intent and responded without showing genuine interest in them. In a story about the power of language, Morrison boldly demonstrates here how words are never enough. Instead of honestly trying to connect with this group of young people, she leaves them with mere words. Just as they try to reduce her to her blindness, she tries to reduce them to silence. Another thing I'm noticing is the battle over the alleged bird in hand and what it potentially means. From the very beginning, these two groups are at cross purposes, and the bird is the device both sides employ to make digs at each other. The young people would use the bird to strip the old woman of her agency and call her status as a paragon of wisdom into question, whereas the old woman would use it to guilt them into shutting up and learning their place. But as we keep reading, we realize that so much more is happening here. As we experience Morrison's narration of the story from a perspective that privileges the old woman, we hear many things that have the ring of truth. One possibility of what the bird in this tale actually signifies is language, and Morrison discusses the immense responsibility we have as a species that does language. Quote, she thinks of language partly as a system, partly as a living thing over which she has control, but mostly as agency, as an act with consequences. Morrison expounds upon this to first talk about our historical tendency to misuse language in order to control and limit. It is a tyrannical language that does not seek to understand, only to exercise dominion over someone or some idea. She contrasts the misuse of language with the true generative power of what she calls word work. Quote, the vitality of language lies in its ability to limn the actual, imagined, and possible lives of its speakers, readers, and writers. Although its poise is sometimes in displacing experience, it is not a substitute for it. It arcs toward the place where meaning may lie. All of this so eloquently put is true, or I'd like to believe it is. We live and die as any other being on this planet does, but we do language and construct meaning and stories together. What we build together shouldn't be reductive or merely the act of summing up. What we talk about and how we talk to each other should be meaningful. That's a really nice note to end on. But we're only halfway done with Morrison's story. After such a beautiful conclusion, what more is there to say? The old wise woman's reprimand, though harsh, was deserved, and upon further reflection, could lead the young people to choose their words more carefully in the future. But we hear those familiar words again. Once upon a time. And the perspective shifts. We begin the tale again, only this time it's about a group of young people, children really, who approach a wise woman with a question. The juxtaposition of these two beginnings illustrates the privileging of one perspective over another in the narrative format. As Morrison weaves the tale again, the children receive our sympathy, and we see the old woman as uncaring for the reprimand she gives them without any follow-up. Quote, nothing. No words follow her declaration of transfer. That silence is deep, deeper than the meaning available in the words she has spoken. It shivers, this silence, and the children, annoyed, fill it with language invented on the spot. One thing I've only just noticed is how the old woman really only has one line when we experience this narrative from her perspective. In contrast, the children speak the vast majority of the story when the perspective shifts to them. She utters one carefully crafted sentence after much silence and contemplation. The rest of her part of the story comprises her thoughts and feelings on this encounter with the children and the significance of the alleged bird in hand, alive or dead. As the audience, we can completely miss the fact that none of the beautiful language that follows her harsh reproof is spoken aloud, meaning, more significantly, that it isn't shared with the very characters in the story who probably need to hear it the most. In contrast, 8 of the 12 paragraphs told from the children's perspective are spoken aloud to the old woman with, as Morrison notes, language invented on the spot. The old woman's reputation and privilege allow her to withhold and take her time. Whereas these children, desperate to be heard and understood, don't have that luxury. They don't have the time and experience required to establish themselves on equal footing with this old woman, who has the advantage over them of having wintered into wisdom. Their motives are not entirely pure, but the important thing here is that they try. They don't wait for the right or perfect words like she does, because they feel a sense of urgency that she can no longer understand as someone who hasn't had to worry about finding her place in the world for a very long time. By juxtaposing 2 narrative accounts of the same encounter told from radically different perspectives, Morrison is able to demonstrate something that is so relevant to the state and the temperature of the current discourse in the gaming world. And we're almost ready to talk about that, so if you've made it this far, first of all, thank you for your patience. I promise, we're almost done. Both parties in this story are at cross purposes. Morrison doesn't shy away from the tensions inherent in allowing both perspectives to vie for the privileged space as the dominant point of view. We are forced to reconcile the wise woman's beautiful thoughts about what it means to do language with the fact that she withholds that crucial information behind a harsh reprimand, just as we are forced to stomach the children's impudence alongside their urgent plea to be heard and understood. Significantly, the good doesn't make the bad go away. It's all there. In the final resounding lines of the story, the old woman says, quote, "Finally, I trust you now. I trust you with the bird that is not in your hands because you have truly caught it. Look, how lovely it is, this thing we have done, together." What this demonstrates, at least to me, is a way to collaborate without compromise. Morrison's narrative refuses to force a resolution. We are never explicitly told that either side sees the error of their ways and learns some moral lesson. Something much more important than that is going on here. They are still at cross purposes, but there's still a path forward that is wide enough for both of their perspectives to continue along together. The children initially came to her with a question that she couldn't answer because she lacked the context required. She could assert her own meaning onto the alleged bird, but that would truly have taken away the children's agency. While it seemed harsh at first, her reprimand followed by silence was the only way forward. Perhaps they weren't entirely certain about what they held in their hands meant to them when they first showed up at her door. But by breaking into her silence, they figured it out. Though they might not have appreciated it at first, she gave them an opportunity in her silence. She could have told them what the bird meant by giving a definitive answer. All they would have been left with would have been a hollow pronouncement with which they could either agree or disagree, and the dialogue would have gone no further. After the children are coerced into providing context to their apparently cruel trick, they return her silence in kind. This time she breaks through with her own words, but she gives them exactly what they needed: the space to talk about what was really in their hands, an invitation to create meaning together, not through compromise, but on an insistence that both perspectives have the space to inform the meaning-making space without one trying to dominate the other. If you know me at all, you know where this is going. Final Fantasy VII. It's larger than that and certainly applies to more video game conversations, but it's so relevant here. Periodically, I get pushed a lot of content warning viewers about another barrage of negativity from OG fans who hate the remake project. That, coupled with a disingenuous comment on one of my videos I very much did not appreciate, got me thinking, Morrison's story is so relevant here. We shouldn't shy away from negativity or try to silence it just because we don't want to hear it. I mean, we can, but that's playing life on easy mode. It's not productive to try to shut each other up. We can be at cross purposes and forge a path ahead. But to do that, we need to give each other the space to break into the silence. And that requires us to take the good with the bad. The kind of word work, as Morrison would put it, that I'm insisting that we do, inviting you to do with me is this: I can think you're wrong, and you can think I'm just as wrong. That's fine. But enough with the jabs, enough with, getting a jab in without actually listening to or valuing what I have to say, and vice versa. And I'm gonna be abrasive to illustrate a point here. We can come at it from cross purposes. I can think that the whispers are stupid as fuck, and you can say enough with the tired old insistence on turn-based combat. That's fine. We could keep responding in kind with jabs at each other going back and forth. Or we could play life on hard mode and recognize that this bird we're fighting over is neither yours nor mine. It's ours. And the meaning we decide to create together or not says a lot more about us than it does about some silly game.